Mrs. Collins was one of the most respected teachers in Maplewood School. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a mentor, a guide, and someone who made learning feel like an adventure. But among all her students, there was one who stood out, not because he was the brightest, but because he had stopped trying. Oliver was a quiet boy who always sat in the last row. He never raised his hand, never participated, and avoided eye contact whenever Mrs. Collins asked a question. No one bullied him, yet he always looked like he was carrying a weight no one could see. One day, after an important math test, Mrs. Collins handed back the graded papers. Most students were excited to see their marks, but Oliver barely glanced at his and stuffed it into his bag. Mrs. Collins noticed and called him after class. "Oliver, do you know why I asked you to stay?" He hesitated, then shook his head. She smiled gently and placed a blank sheet of paper in front of him. "I have one last question for you, and I need you to answer it honestly." Oliver swallowed. He wasn't sure what to expect. Mrs. Collins wrote a single sentence on the paper. "Why have you given up?" Oliver felt his chest tighten. He stared at the words for a long time. No teacher had ever asked him that before. They scolded him for bad grades, gave him extra assignments, or called his parents. But no one had ever asked why. After a deep breath, he slowly wrote back, "Because I don't think I'm good enough." Mrs. Collins read his words and then did something unexpected. She wrote right below them, "Who told you that?" Oliver stared at the question. He had no answer. No one had ever directly said it to him. It was something he had decided for himself after failing a few times, after comparing himself to others, after feeling like no one expected much from him. Mrs. Collins smiled. "You see, Oliver, the world never told you that you weren't good enough. You told yourself that. And just like you decided to believe in your weakness, you can choose to believe in your strength." For the first time, Oliver felt something shift inside him. Maybe he wasn't as hopeless as he thought. Maybe he had been holding himself back. From that day on, he tried. Just a little. He still wasn't the best student, but he started asking questions, making mistakes, learning from them. And slowly his confidence grew. Moral: the biggest barrier in life is not failure. It's the belief that you can't succeed. Never tell yourself that you're not good enough. You become what you believe.